Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest edition of the Haskincast podcast, the first one of 2018, and we have a very special guest for you today. I'm very excited to have interviewed Angela Chen, who is a keyboard and piano player here in Las Vegas. She's currently working as the assistant band director at Reve at the Wynn Hotel. Absolutely beautiful show. If you haven't seen it, it's one to see when you're here. Also, she has worked on many other shows. She's done a lot of stuff at the Smith Center. She's worked on some plays with the school. She's worked on some of the independent plays that happen here in the Art District. I've had the pleasure of working with her on a couple of shows. She is absolutely phenomenal. And we talk about some work that she's done both as a musical director, as an assistant musical director, and then just as a touring keyboardist in some of the shows. She's worked on Cats. She's worked on just about everything. Really amazing and just a truly, truly wonderful person. Greg German, who I had on not too long ago, actually introduced me to her and her husband, Alex, who will be coming on the show sometime in a month or so. And just truly wonderful, honest, real people, the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with. And I'm very, very fortunate to know them. And we get together from time to time. We're all so busy that it's really hard to find time to not just even find a day where we have a hole in our schedule, but where that lines up, where we can actually get together. So I don't get to see them as often as I would like, but I do get to see them from time to time. Also, when I was at the NAMM show last January, Alex and our friend Rachel performed on marimba, and I've got some photos and videos of that on my Facebook page. And then some of the work that Angela's done, she does some work as the Chanosaurus Rex, where she dresses up in the T-Rex costume and shoots some really hilarious videos that I've gotten to be a part of a couple of those. And also, she did the Elf Eggnog video, which I recently posted on Facebook that she did for this past Christmas. And we've got the links to that in the show notes. We didn't get to talk about the Chanosaurus Rex thing because, there was just only so much time. Really could have talked to her for another hour. Also, the link to the Sad Pianist Christmas song is in the links as well, or in the show notes as well, and we didn't get to talk about that. But we did get to talk a little bit about the Elf video and some of her other work. So it was a great time talking to her. So grateful that she made some time to come on the show because she really is very, very busy. And I hope you guys had a great Christmas. I hope that you're all enjoying the New Year's and that you didn't get too crazy, that you're all healthy and recovering and all of that. I don't have a lot of rules in life, but one of my rules is that I do not leave the house on New Year's Eve. Especially living in Vegas, we have a higher number of drunk drivers, I think, than some other places. And going out on New Year's Eve really kind of is just tempting that. And not to mention that, as often as I walk the Strip, this particular night, because they close it down, and even though the street, you can walk, anywhere in the street, it's just a ton of people. I think they were estimating 350,000 people this year. And, I like to move. Like when I'm out there, I like to walk and I like to move. And I usually go a little bit later when there's less people so that I'm less encumbered by the traffic. And, this is just going to be a dead standstill. So it's the one night of year that I don't go out. And I actually had this rule long before I moved to Vegas. I just really don't like to go out on New Year's Eve. But for those of you that did, I hope that you had a safe and wonderful time. I'm curious to hear your New Year's resolutions. I really don't do resolutions because I think that if you want to make a change, you should just make the change. I don't think that you should wait for a specific day because when you do, you're not in the zone that you were when you wanted to make the change. And I think that has a high impact on the success rate. And I think that's why most New Year's resolutions fail before the end of January. I just, if you want your life to be different, just make it different. It's really that simple to me. But for other people, some people are really good at setting themselves up as goals. Like I want to quit smoking on January 1st. And they're able to just put that down and really be done with it. And to me, that's pretty amazing. When I quit smoking, it was because I just didn't want to do it anymore. I remember I took a friend out for her birthday to the Cheesecake Factory, and we went back to her place, hung out for a little while. I came home, walked out onto my patio, lit a cigarette, took like 2 drags, and said, I'm just done with this. And I was. That was the end of it. I still occasionally get cravings, and I want to say this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. It's probably closer to 5. I think it was September of 2013. Yeah, it had to have been, because I left Arizona in 2014 to move to LA. So yeah, it was September 2013. So we're talking a little over 5 years now. And, I still get cravings. There's still those triggers, like after a big meal, or, after doing a huge job or something like that, or sometimes even just to take a break from like working on an audiobook or something, I would go smoke a cigarette. And I've been fortunate enough to have withstood the cravings. I have not had one since, not even a drag. I did have one clove cigarette. I want to say I had like 4 drags of a clove cigarette, and I got a really bad headache from it. So that's pretty much the end of it. And no e-cigarettes, no nothing like that. I did an e-cigarette for a little while, and it was really more work than it was worth, and I didn't enjoy that either. And now, of course, the truth about those has come out, and how bad they are for you. And but my point is more of, if you want to change, just change. If you're one of those people who's really good at scheduling change and sticking to it, more power to you, because that's not something that's ever really worked for me. So anyway, I hope you guys are enjoying the new year, and I hope you enjoy the interview with Angela. She's hilarious, just a lot of fun to be around, highly intelligent, incredibly talented musician, and a really good writer too. I like the stuff that I've heard that she's created. So without further ado, let's bring Angela on the show. And let's welcome Angela to the show. Angela, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Super excited.
You have a really busy schedule. You do a lot of work.
People say that. I always think that's not true, but then somehow it's always true.
Well, I mean, you have your show that you perform 5 nights a week, and you're doing what? You guys are doing 2 shows a night, right?
That's correct. 2 shows a night, 7 and 9:30.
Yeah, that's a lot in and of itself. But then you seem to find a lot of other projects to work on in between. I mean, it really amazes me how hard you work.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I like to keep pretty busy. Keep the old brain going.
Right. Well, you're currently the assistant band leader at Reve, which is at the Wynn Hotel. Beautiful show. I saw it a couple years ago, and just fantastic, very grandiose. Was that a show? You were temping on that show, though, before you started working permanently, right?
Yes, so I was studying on that show for about 2 years before the music director left, and I ended up taking over his keyboard book, and our bass player ended up taking over as the music director position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but those aren't typically jobs that have a high turnover, right?
Actually, those don't. The guy who was the keyboard player in my spot before had been there for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. I know Tyler, our MD now, has been there for 10 years, as well as our guitar player, actually. And the singer, our male singer, has been there for a long time. I don't know if he was one of the original ones, but he's been there quite a while. Mm-hmm. The newbies are actually myself. I'm probably the oldest of the new ones, and I started about a little over a year and a half ago. My husband, who's the drummer, just had been subbing for 3 years and then went full-time in May. And then our keyboard 2 and Ableton programmer joined us last October. So wow. We've got a little bit of young blood. But before that, those chairs, I think the key 2 chair hadn't turned over ever, and neither had the drum chair, actually.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, though, that's kind of the dream, right, is to get in a show like that. And once you get there, even if it's monotonous after a while, you really don't want to leave, because it's not that easy to find another show to just jump on and work in.
Yeah, and especially like the current climate right now, there's not a lot of shows going on. So we were all really super lucky to get this show. I mean, it's been running for 13 and a half years. It'll be 14 in May, I believe. And it's kind of like that Office Space thing. Wouldn't it be great if you're still in 10 years? That kind of job security would be amazing.
Yeah, and it's even worse in the corporate world. But and you were also, when you were subbing for Reve, you were also subbing on Ka and a couple other shows, weren't you?
Yeah, so I subbed on Ka for about 5 years. Before that, I was kind of subbing kind of in and out of some of the touring shows that went through the Smith Center. So I've subbed on Waitress and American in Paris, The Sound of Music, I believe, are some of the recent ones, and Wicked. Yeah, and it's pretty. I keep pretty busy doing stuff there, and sometimes I'll fill in with like the Philharmonic or with the Nevada Ballet Theater Orchestra as well.
Mm-hmm. What's the reality of walking in and subbing on a gig like that, where it's something that, you at least with Ka and Reve, you've gotten to work with these people quite a bit and you're familiar with the show, but when a show just comes into town, you really don't get a lot of rehearsal time. What's the reality of just jumping in and working on a show like that?
The reality is you got to put in a lot of prep work if you want to go in and nail it the first time. Because I spent so much time on the road, I know a lot of the people that are on the road that come through, so I kind of have a little bit of advantage being able to contact people ahead of time if I've got questions, and I always do, and I always just mark the crap out of my books, and I get to make sure I get a recording, I listen to it, I just make sure if I've missed anything more than once or twice when I'm practicing it, I just mark it, highlight it. I'll write in, lyrics in case I space out sometimes, which I do. I mean, everybody does, but, I know that I do it, so I plan for it.
That's smart. That's a good preparation there.
But I'll basically just work it and work it. I mean, a lot of times we don't have a ton of time to do it. So sometimes our books can come in as with as little time as maybe like a week and a half to prepare, to maybe sometimes a couple weeks if we're lucky. And yeah, usually you get, when you're a regular player that gets picked up in a city, and you're playing all the shows, you'll get the 1 day of rehearsal. There's usually like a 4 or 5 hour rehearsal the day of the show. Then you'll do a sound check, and then you'll start the shows that night. So that first show day, those Tuesdays are really long. But when you're a sub and you're just singing in for a show for the week, you'll do the rehearsal, and then you'll get to watch a show, and then you probably on that Tuesday, and then you won't go in again until the weekend to play like 1 or 2 shows.
Wow, so that's a lot of work for 1 or 2 performances.
It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of pressure too. I mean, it's a huge challenge because every time you walk in, you're going to be on a different keyboard rig. You don't really know what the sounds are going to be. Like they'll be listed on your labels sometimes on our keyboard books, but if something is mapped to a key, like you're playing like a chromatic scale, and maybe "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina" is coming out. It's a little bit trickier to practice on a keyboard book at home than it is for other instruments, because what they're playing is what's actually being heard. And a lot of times with us, we're kind of filling in the rest of the orchestra, so you kind of have to just get used to listening to the orchestration, kind of matching what the articulations are of each of the instruments that you're playing, and kind of sometimes just holding your breath and hoping that you got it right.
Yeah, I mean, if you really have a minimal prep time, and of course the piano is a pretty featured instrument in just about every musical, so it's really right up front, and you have to be on it. How you really probably don't get a lot of opportunity to memorize? Is it really just your sharp sight reading skills that get you through that?
Yes, actually. Well, a lot of it is just, it's just prep time. I've spent a lot of time working with the music, looking at it, knowing how I need to get it situated, resituating it if I have I find I've got a page turn that I'm not going to make. I know a lot of times the shows will carry their own kind of like larger, really nicely printed copies of music of the books, which they leave there. They have all the patch changes and everything labeled and some other stuff. But because I practice so much on mine and I write myself notes, I usually just use my music, and that way I know that there's not going to be something that I've missed that's not going to catch my eye that I'll need to know when I'm in the hot seat.
Right. Is there a different strategy when you're on the road doing a show and you are the lead?
No, because usually if you're on the road, and you started with the show, it's a little bit different, because sometimes you'll have gotten to have rehearsal, like cast rehearsals. But if you haven't had cast rehearsals, then usually we have at least, a keyboard rehearsal for like a couple days which I did when we were with the Wizard of Oz. We had maybe like 2 days with just the keyboards to kind of figure out the programming, make sure the programming is correct and it matched the charts that we got, which were kind of slightly altered and fixed from what we had been sent a couple weeks earlier. That show in particular, I think I got hired for 3 weeks before it opened. I got the music about 2 weeks out. We got there for Tech Week. We had 2 days to kind of look through the keyboard stuff with the music supervisor and the keyboard programmer. And then they brought the rest of the orchestra in. And then we had, just a couple of really, really long days of rehearsal during that Tech Week. I mean, we're probably 8 or 10 hours, that we're there. And then, running the show and then opening for previews that weekend.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
And it's a lot. And that particular book was, I felt was a little bit more difficult than others because there were 3 keyboards on that tour on the Andrew Lloyd Webber Wizard of Oz. And I mean, we were playing like everything. If there was something that could be played, it was everything. But it was really well orchestrated though, because I mean, we still had a 10-piece orchestra. We carried the conductor, who was a stand-up conductor, 3 keyboards and percussion, and we picked up everything else. So we picked up like strings and brass, and that orchestration was great because with the keyboards, even though we had a ton of stuff, we were orchestrated in a way that we were actually mostly filler, and the other live instruments we had were kind of a bit like a chamber group, and everything they were playing was really important and kind of soloistic. So it really worked well. A lot of people couldn't believe that there weren't like 25 people down in the pit for that one.
Yeah, I think from what I've looked at in his scores, it seems like he really writes very well for performance and not just the composition.
Yeah, I mean, and also he's got a pretty brilliant orchestrator, whoever that may have been for that show. I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Well, I mean, you've worked on so many, Now, interesting that you bring up Andrew Lloyd Webber, because my dream show, the one that's kind of my bucket list thing I've always wanted to do, is to...
Please don't say Cats.
It's not Cats.
Thank God.
No. But it's always been Jesus Christ Superstar, because that was the first thing musically that I really started to pay attention to and kind of dissect when I was very young. And this was back in the days before we even had VCR. So the only time it played was 4 a.m. on Easter Sunday. And if you couldn't stay awake for it, too bad, because you couldn't go rent it anywhere. You couldn't tape it. You were just out of luck. Is there a show that you would love to do that you haven't had the chance yet?
That's a good question.
Because you've played on a lot of shows.
I have played on a lot of shows. I don't know. I mean, An American in Paris was beautiful, and I actually played the keyboard. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3. It's probably the 3rd keyboard on that. That show was just, the orchestration was just beautiful, and I hadn't got a chance to see it but on the stage, but my husband did, and he said it was just a gorgeous show. And I mean, watching the videos, like the sets and just the ballet dancing is just, everything about it is so amazing.
It's very simple, but it's also very intense at the same time. It's a very well put together show. It's kind of made for a compact space, but completely filled.
Yeah, and I mean, and what's funny about ballet is the things that look the easiest are the things that are actually the hardest. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, she's starting really slowly. It's probably because she can't, turn faster. But in reality, that's probably one of the hardest things to do, because you're not thinking about she's controlling every single muscle in her body to turn that slow, right, and not waver and not fall down. So, yeah, I mean, I love that show. I love Wicked. I wish that I would have been around to have played Book of Mormon when it's come through. I was trying to think if there's anything I've seen recently that I just really, really was like, man.
I still haven't seen Book of Mormon, but I've heard nothing but great things about it. I've not heard anybody come back and say it was awful.
Oh, it's so funny. I've only heard one person say that, but it was just some people that were at like a bar that we were at. They were just like, oh, it would have been fine without all of that, like language. Oh. And I was thinking, I don't know how you went to that show and didn't know that that's what you were getting into. Right,
because Trey Parker and Matt Stone write kids shows, and I mean, they're pretty well known,
Yeah, I feel like if you didn't know that going in, that's sort of your bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, but people are that way, and I think a lot of people that don't necessarily have artistic skills will typically jump in and try and form some sort of opinion to feel like they are a part of it, even if the opinion's complete nonsense.
Yeah, I call those people artistically adjacent.
Ooh, I like that. I have a friend who's an author, and somebody had given her some bad feedback on one of her books, saying that they were concerned about the author's characters because they didn't seem to eat and sleep enough. It's a book. I mean,
obviously, that person had not seen the show 24.
But I mean, that's the kind of feedback that you get from people sometimes, and it's typically people that really don't have any artistic merit, and they wish maybe that they did, and so they have to try and become a part of it. And I get that on one level, but on another level, it's like if what you're going to say is pointless, why are you saying it?
Well, it's funny because I think one of the first times I ever got negative feedback for something that I wrote was when we were first putting up Tiger Mother, and I had just, like YouTube was still new, because it makes me sound really old, but YouTube's not as old as some people think they are, mostly to children. But I put up a video from a rehearsal we had at my house for the song Lazy White Children. And it was funny. Like, I thought it was funny. They tripped over my dog at the end of the video. It's a silly song, and everybody loved it. And one of my friends from high school had shared it on her page, and and all of her Asian friends were just like, "Oh, that's so funny." And there was one guy, and I didn't know him. He was just, I think, a friend of hers, like in Texas somewhere. Took offense to it, which is, I mean, that's fine. But then he kind of like kept going with it, like on her page, and it was. And then she finally made it into a separate chat, because I think she was just a little bit mortified that stuff was going on her page. But but basically he kind of was like, like, I'm offended by what you wrote in this song, and and I'm not Asian, but my wife is, and she was offended, and and basically kind of compared me to the Nazis. I'm not really sure how he made the connection. I probably have like an email with that still somewhere, because I was too amused to be mad. And I was like, who is this guy? And, he was just like, basically how, like, it's up to him to kind of like save integrity and like, he was just so offended, and, he didn't think it was funny, and his wife didn't think it was funny. He was Asian, showed it to his wife's parents, and who were Asian, and they didn't think it was funny. And I was like, oh, keep going with that. Show it to everyone so that you can tell them how not funny I am. And in the meantime, I just racked up like 75 views on this video, so thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like the PMRC. When the PMRC came out, and Tipper Gore was the one in charge of that, she was actually helping records reach gold and platinum level success for bands that would have never been heard of, just because she put a warning label on it. And it really works against people that are fighting against something that they don't like. But I don't really get the concept of, if you have something constructive to say, maybe something like, there are a lot of racial euphemisms. You may not want to watch this show if you're offended by that. I didn't like it for that reason. That's constructive. But to just bash something because you don't like it or you're offended by it, I don't get that mentality at all.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. And especially him, too, because I think he was, I mean, I don't want to be a racist, but, like, so white dude complaining about an Asian song, and he has an Asian wife with Asian parents. I'm like, so you're the one who was offended, but I feel like they probably thought it was either funny or true.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe they didn't want to tell you because you were a little bit worked up.
Yeah. And I mean, it is true. Stereotypes come from something. There has to be some amount of consistency of behavior or action that causes a stereotype to become a thing. Then it's a matter of whether it's played up in a joking way or played up in an angry way, or people are sensitive or not. I've known you pretty well for a few years now, and I've never thought there was anything that you said or did that I would question your integrity as a person.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And you embrace your culture. You make light of the Asian stereotypes and that. I've seen you
look at my driving. You've been in a car with me.
I have been in a car with you. And I lived, so I can't complain. It was a short distance, but that's beside the point. So let's talk a little bit about Tiger Mother. What was the inspiration behind you wanting to make that happen?
You're going to totally laugh at this. So originally, it had started out as a cabaret idea because at the time, I think it was probably about maybe a year after I had started dating my now husband, who is Australian. He's from Adelaide, South Australia, and he was a doctoral student at UNLV at the time. And the first year that we were dating, UNLV was doing some concerts down in the Adelaide Fringe Festival. And it was basically because I think one of the other guys who was in the department was also from Adelaide, so he sort of just used that as a way to pay off a free trip home. And so Alex was doing that, and so that was the first time I'd gone to Australia. And I was like, oh, great. They had this huge, I had no idea they had this huge festival. It's like the second largest Fringe festival in the world. And while we were down there, I happened to be in the Central Marketplace, and where they just have posters plastered for everything, like all the shows everywhere. And I happened to turn and look at a wall in the food court, and right smack in the middle is a flyer for a show, a one-woman show. And that woman is like, the woman that I had ended up auditioning for to go out on the road with Troika Tours back in 2002, I think. And I hadn't seen her since then. Like, I had driven, I remember the contractor had called me and said, hey, what are you doing? Are you anywhere near Biloxi? And I was like, well, I actually am driving from Florida, or from Texas to Florida, but I'm going to stop through Biloxi on my way over there. Do you want me to just stop by and play for her there? And he was like, yeah, that's great. And I drove, and I was at the Grand Casino Biloxi. She was doing Annie, Get Your Gun at the time. And you know, it was great. I got to see the show. We hung out. And then the next day I played for her kind of hungover. And it was great. And I mean, and she and I have been friends pretty much since then. So that's probably been about, 16 years now at this point.
Wow.
So, but she was also, she left the road, she left touring for a little while and was doing a one-woman show and on cruise ships and in the festivals. And she just happened to be also there doing a show in that festival. And I was like, this is great. And so I went and I saw her show, and I was like, wow, she's amazing. I went and saw the UNLV show, and I was like, this is pretty trash.
Oh, wow.
I was like, but obviously they'll let anything in this festival. So, you know, maybe I should just do something in the festival and I can get a free trip to Australia.
Sweet.
Not free, but you know, you can write it off. So it actually started off as a way to just kind of write off a trip to Australia. And it started out as sort of a cabaret that I'd sort of was going to do and kind of formulate with some girls that were in, I had just done like an Asian Heritage Month thing with performance with, but it ended up kind of just changing directions. And my friend Michael Manley, who was a horn player at Lion King here at the time, was interested. So he's like, why don't we, you know, like co-write it and we can work together? And I was like, great. And so then it kind of developed into original songs instead of just, I was just thinking maybe to keep it as simple as possible, to sort of do this kind of a cabaret kind of thing and just kind of use songs that were already written for musical theater. But it turned out kind of morphing into its own story with its own original songs. And that was kind of something that I kind of hadn't really expected. And we wrote it kind of throughout the fall. We did kind of a 2-day kind of workshop, kind of previews here in Las Vegas, at a little art gallery actually. And, but somewhere in between there, you know, I had entered us in the Adelaide Fringe Festival just because that's what I was always going to do. And then we got into a small theater festival in New York in Times Square. And we were just like, okay, so now we got a couple more places to do this, so we'll kind of keep writing it off. I ended up finding 2 actresses in Adelaide that were going to do the show and trying to figure out how to rehearse with them and also not be there.
Right, yeah.
Was a bit of a challenge. And the same thing with our New York cast, you know, and so we kind of did a lot of things kind of over Skype or, you know, kind of conference call type. Luckily, my 2 friends that were in New York, you know, we could get together a little bit easier and like they knew each other, and they were both just phenomenal. They were probably like the most amazing cast that I had out of the 3 casts that I did the show with. But but yeah, you know, like when we did it in Australia for like a month, for maybe like once a week for at least 3 or 4 weeks, I was doing Skype rehearsals with those 2 girls down there in Adelaide. You know, and then it's kind of strange because, like, you know, they're sort of running through it. Everything's sort of on a delay when we have to kind of say things. So it's a little bit more difficult. And then once I got there, I did 5 straight days of rehearsals, and then we put the show up for, I can't remember if it was like 5 or 6 shows or something.
Wow.
So yeah, and then right before we had left to go to Australia, we'd entered the lottery for the San Francisco Fringe, because we thought, oh, there's a lot of Asian people in San Francisco.
Right.
So we entered that, and and that one's kind of crazy because a lot of people enter that because they have 2 categories, which is in town, people that are in town, local shows, and then ones that are not local. And there's a lottery, and I forget how many spots there are. There were maybe like 12, and we got like the last spot.
Oh, wow.
And so we're like, oh, okay, so now we're going to San Francisco. That's amazing. And that ended, and I brought my cast from New York. They came out there because actually Satomi Hoffman, who is currently in the ensemble and a Madame Giry cover and Carlotta cover on Phantom on Broadway, New York, came down and did it. And my other actress, he played the daughter, I had done Cats with when I had gone back very briefly on the road. and they came down, and it was great. Satomi I didn't realize she'd grown up there, and my publicist got mad at me for not mentioning that. But but I can only know so many things about everyone.
Well, yeah, and you have to do the highlight words that are going to draw attention, right? New York is one of those big ones, and Vegas is one of those big ones. If you don't do that, yeah, people get upset.
Yeah, so we went there, and we actually won a Best of the Fringe Festival award there, which
cool.
was kind of amazing. And it was just kind of such of a weird whirlwind of a year of something I just never really expected to do. And in between there, I ended up getting engaged while we were in Adelaide, right after we finished our run at the Adelaide Fringe Festival. Oh, and wow. Then the year after, I got married.
Yeah, good timing, Alex. Well, it worked out well. But maybe that's part of the success of things, though, is when you're not trying to do something specifically to be successful or to build a name for yourself. You just, here's an idea I have, let's just try this and see where it goes. But you put the work and the quality into it, but you're not specifically trying to become famous. You're just doing it because it's something that's fun to you.
It's fun to me. I also do it with the goal of, doing the best job on it. Anybody that knows me knows that there's nothing that I do that I'm going to do at less than 150% full force.
Right. Yeah.
So, I'm going to write a show, but I'm also going to, while I have a tight budget, I'm still going to not let it look like I had a tight budget. I'm going to make it look like a finished product, because that's what's kind of interesting about doing so many things, is I learned so much about producing a show and all the aspects of the show, because I did the costuming and the props and the music, and I did so many, basically was the producer for that show. It was and the company manager and our travel agent. I had so many hats. It was kind of crazy, and it was nothing that I'd really done before. I'd had a little bit of marketing training, because I worked for a year and a half in the offices at Blue Man Group in this kind of, I call it a made-up department. It wasn't. It was real, but it was a department called External Affairs. Mm-hmm. And my boss, who's one of my dear friends now, Leanne Groff-Daudet.
She's awesome.
She was amazing. And she just kind of just was I just want, even if you don't know the stuff, I just want somebody who's smart. Let's work smarter, not harder. Let's get stuff done. And it was so great to work with her that year. I learned a lot about marketing, a lot about PR, about all the charitable giving aspects and community. And, at the same time, I was doing a lot of benefit performances. So I was kind of learning some things from how those were being run as well. So that kind of helped form how I wanted things to go, and what I wanted to do, and what I was willing to spend money on and what I was not willing to spend money on.
Yeah, and those decisions, especially the smaller your budget is, the more important those become. Leanne is awesome. We've been talking about a time for her to come on the show, but of course she's been traveling through the holidays. But she's currently working on opium and absinthe in the marketing department.
Yes, she is.
It's crazy. She's another one like you that just constantly, okay, I have a free minute. What else can I fill that with?
And Leanne is like one of those people, you swear she like puts cats to like the animal cats to shame, because you're like, they have 9 lives, but it's like Leanne's had like 20.
Yeah.
And you're like, when did you do all this?
Yeah, the first time, well, she and I have only gone to coffee once, but just listening to her, even 10 minutes of her telling her history, I'm like, how could you possibly have fit all that into your life up to this point?
I know, it's really amazing. Like, you would never, you're like, so you did all these things. I mean, and she's one of those people, she is just not afraid. She's fearless. You know, like when she was out of college, she just went to Paris and was like, went knocking on the door at 20th Century Fox in Paris, followed in a delivery boy. It's like one of those stories that you hear about and you're like, there's no way that's true. But for her, she's one of those people, it's totally true.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've done a couple of potentially bold things in my life, but I don't think I would have ever even considered doing something like that. Absolutely amazing. But here's an interesting thing about you. You said to me a couple of years ago that you really don't consider yourself a composer, but here you've written this musical and you've written a bunch of other things that are interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel that way because I'm not making like my living as a composer, and I can think of a bunch of people who are actual composers, like that really deserve that title way more than I do.
I can see that. I can. But when you were writing Tiger Mother, how did you decide that you were done? I mean, as creatives, we tend to go, okay, but let me just tweak this. Okay, well, you know what? Now that I did that, let me do this other thing. And we can just go on endlessly and never actually finish a project. Was there something that you just looked at it and said, okay, this is finished?
Probably Father Time determined that a little bit.
Well, yeah.
But, no, I mean, like, you just that show was a festival length, so it was probably about 50 to 55 minutes long. And, I think we just tried to, like, we did, and we sort of, like, kind of did some revisions after we did that first those 2 first preview performances. And, like, I feel like we sort of kind of ended the story in a way that kind of closed that frame of the story. But I mean, I feel like, but there were a lot of people that had seen it that were just like, yeah, like I really want to find out like more, like what happens like after that, and and that's where you get into that tricky territory. Like when you have something that's kind of shorter like that does so well, it's like, all right, what do we do next that's not going to take away from the success that we just built up? And it's and it's a lot of thought. It's like, well, okay, like, do we do this? Do we do this? How do we, do we want to go back in time a little bit? And it was an idea that I'd sort of played around with, kind of maybe the opening scene sort of maybe set in China, and kind of maybe doing a little snapshot of the mother when she was a child with her mother. And so I was trying to do a lot of research on it, and it was, it's so hard to find accurate information from China just because of what they control comes out. So really the only way you can kind of do that is by actually talking to people or interviewing them, or, trying to talk to people who studied the culture over there, which actually is a lot trickier than you would think. Like even just doing regular internet research, I emailed a couple of professors of Asian studies, and I didn't have much success like trying to get in touch with them.
Wow. Is there a fear of maybe revealing some of the information because the news in general is so controlled that maybe people are a little afraid to be honest and speak out?
I don't know. I just know that some of the information that's out is a little bit skewed because, China wants everything to look a certain way. And ironically, like that's sort of a theme that's in the show, like the mother wants something to look a certain way. But that reality underlying reality is, it's not as perfect or as easy or strong as it seems on the front. Right. And the reason I really wanted to do all that research was because I wanted it to be accurate and I wanted it to be real, and I didn't want somebody who had lived through that time in China to watch it and say that would never happen. Right. It would be like a professional drummer watching Whiplash. While that's entertaining to a lot of people who aren't drummers, like to a lot of drummers, they're like, his hand is bleeding in a place his stick wasn't even touching. Like, girl. Or who plays that fast with their drums being in the closet for 6 months? Right. I don't think so.
Yeah, I did enjoy the artistic liberties of that film, I will say.
Yeah, but I just think one of the things that makes a story so powerful is you can relate to it because it's it's real to you, you know? And I think what connected to a lot of people with that show in particular is just, you know, even though it was centered in the Asian culture, it's really about a relationship between mothers and daughters. And you know, it's easy to set it in the Asian culture because that's what I grew up in.
Right.
I know my coworker or my co-writer Michael. You know, like sometimes when we were throwing around ideas, it was funny because it was hard. He grew up in such a different way than I had. You know, it was blowing his mind a little bit. You know, some of the things that, you know, when the director or like our actresses, when we were, you know, sitting around kind of like discussing and fleshing things out, you know, it'd blow his mind like, that can't be real. And I'm like, oh, we were all like, oh yeah, that totally happened. Like,
right.
And we're just like, yeah, that's just what it is. And he's like, but that's so mean. I'm like, yeah, we know.
Yeah, well, I think that over here in the States, we have very rose-colored views of other cultures, and I think that not a lot of people tend to really dig deeply into that unless they have a specific reason to, or unless it just happens to interest them. And so whatever we've learned, be it through movies or documentaries, probably more movies, becomes our perception of those cultures. And I don't think that they're usually accurate.
No, and I think that especially like kind of nowadays, it's just like everything is so litigious and everybody's so afraid of, you know, like offending someone that we've sort of kind of gone the other side of the spectrum. You know, like we're now, I feel like people are afraid to let their kids fail.
Yeah.
Because that's the end. When really, to me, it's not that if your kid fails once, like that's it, they're out. I mean, if you think about when kids play video games, it's like, would they play the video game and then they die once and then like that's it? Like they don't play it again?
Right.
No, like kids are resilient. Like if they don't beat it the first time, if they're smart, they'll try something different until they get to the next level and then the next level until they beat the game. That's how they bounce back. That's how they learn their skills. And it's the same way with life. I mean, like it's like if you have one heartbreak, it can taint your view of relationships for a long time, but that doesn't mean that you're going to automatically stop doing it because you failed once. You know, like you get back out there, and it's, you know, same with jobs and like recitals and performing. You know, like you might have messed up at a recital or something, but you know, the next time maybe you play it perfectly, or maybe you win a competition. But, right. You know, everything comes with some aspect of failure. And I think without the failure, you don't really earn the winning.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a natural thing in us that desires to succeed and to be able to develop the ability to succeed. I think that, like, there's a piece of software that's about to come out that I was asked to look at. And I didn't know the company. I'd never heard of them before, but for some reason they had found me and asked me my opinion. And basically what it is it's as they market it, it's to help composers get through when they're working on a tight deadline and they have writer's block. And basically what it is you feed into the computer what you've written so far, and you push a button and it fills in the next section for you up to whatever point you want it to do. And I thought, so this is basically like an easy button for lazy composers who don't want to work at overcoming challenges. They're just going to go, I'm not really sure what to do next. Oh, I know, I'll just hit this button. And we're going to be, you know, flooded with a bunch of terrible ideas. And the other claim that they had, which was even more preposterous, was it checks every database and will give you something that's never been written before.
Huh.
I'm like, I don't care who developed that. That's not even possible.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure every combination of notes has been used. It's a matter of how they're used that makes it interesting, you know. But it's one of those things that's like another reason to not grow skills and to not work hard, because you can find some way to circumvent it and be somewhat successful. So I think you're right. I think there is a natural desire in people to work hard. And like the video game example, I'm going to beat this level. And you might get frustrated and step back from it for a couple days, but it's going to gnaw at you, and you're going to want to come back and beat that game.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I totally understand, like, as like a parent's first instinct is they want to protect their kids. Mm-hmm. You know, you want to protect them from everything bad in the world, from failing. At the same time, you know, like, it's just, it's like when you were a kid back in the 80s when, it was okay to still spank children without getting arrested.
Right.
And like, like your mom would say, I'm sorry, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And it would, and that would still totally be true, but we got the point.
Right. Yeah. Of course, that was back in the days where we drank water from the hose and we lived.
Yeah. I mean, a little failing never really hurt anyone. And if you never fail, you'll never learn. I mean, there's not a single person in history that is just success 100% of the time. I mean, even back to like the Renaissance era. I mean, you look at like Michelangelo and Da Vinci. I mean, like, I'm sure like their first drawings and sculptures were not their greatest masterpieces, nor was everything that they did.
Right.
Like there's some things that they do, and then they look at it and they're like, this is, I would have done this differently. And then they do it differently and they develop that skills. Like I never had any training as a writer, really. I mean, I took I think, the regular music classes in college, like music theory, but I never had to take arranging. And I mean, and looking back, I mean, like, just based on the time that I went to college, I wish that there were some things I had taken that I had known that I needed the skills for. Like, I didn't know that I would probably need to know how to arrange for like small ensemble,
right.
Or like I probably should have taken some more vocal lessons and learned more vocal technique, or taken more conducting classes, or learned like even technology. Because I think back in the day, like I bought Finale 2000 when it was brand new, which means it came out in at least 99. And I still haven't figured out how to use it.
Was that on floppy disk or CD?
Oh, I think a dinosaur delivered it to my computer, actually.
Yeah, I was looking. Somebody had posted one of the main DAW that I use is Cakewalk, which is now owned by BandLab because Gibson sold it off to them. But somebody had posted one of the pictures of one of the original discs, and I thought I had that disc. I remember that.
I remember having a mini disc recorder and recording things on it and not knowing how to play it back.
That's only slightly important,
Well, yeah, I never figured that out. But yeah, I mean, and it's funny because even when I did Eggnog this last time, I asked our key 2 player on Reve is a great arranger. I mean, like he does like tracks for like cruise ship gigs and like shows, and he's just, I mean, he's such a meticulous arranger. All of his charts, they're like the best looking charts I've ever seen. So I really don't go to anybody else besides him. Robbie Wingfield is his name, if anybody's looking for an arranger.
Yeah.
But it's funny because when I was doing Eggnog, I was like, all right, I need to at least try to save money. I need to at least try and do some of these other instrument charts myself. So I was starting off with like trying to do like a bass part and guitar part and something for Alex to play on the drums. Because originally it was just going to be rhythm section. And I brought my music in to work, and Robbie would sit with me in the green room, and I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out these chord changes. And I was like, all right, F, A, C, D, F, 6. And I'm fine when it's just like simple chords, but sometimes like all those jazz guys, they're like, oh yeah, you just like substitute the blah 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 and flat this, and then you tritone. I'm just like, you might as well just be speaking Chinese to me because I have no idea what any of those numbers just meant.
Right,
is it an F6 or is it not? And it's like, because he would just be laughing at me the whole time, like, well, as I was painstakingly going through it, but he was also laughing because he's like, I don't get it. He's like, you don't really know like what any of these chords are, but you can play them. And he's like, and they said they're exactly what you want. You just don't know what they're called.
Right.
And I was like, I know. I was like, I could learn, but then, I don't know, somehow time escapes me and I don't have time to just sit down and really learn what all the jazz chords are, what they're called. And there's so many combinations. I mean, it's kind of mind boggling.
Yeah. And then you work on a show like Ka with Derek Jones, who's the bass player there, and he could recite that all to you in his sleep without even thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, some of those guys, and he's from Nashville, too, where they use, like, a number system, which is a whole other thing. Like, there's no keys. There's just, like, oh, we're going to start on 4. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, right.
But everybody knows what it means.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really interesting. And now let's talk about the Eggnog song. I had so much fun when we were working on the video. You One of the things that I love about you is that, like you said, you don't just do something, you put 150% into it. And everything that I've ever seen you do, whether it was a show we worked on together, whether it was something that you've just performed, or whether it's a video you're doing for whatever reason you're doing it, you really do go all out. And this Eggnog song was no different. I was telling Alex the other day that even down to the singer and his motions in the video, which kind of were a little bit organic because you were putting it together as you were shooting it, but you could not have picked anybody better to play that role.
Yeah, I mean, David Valilla was amazing, and he's so funny, and he loved the song too, which I think really helps. Like, if you like the song and you enjoy it, then I feel like people can feel that you like it, right. And it makes it more fun. And he's so easy to work with. Because I called him, he was just like, all right. He's like, I'm going to sing it through. Tell me if you like it. I love direction. Just let me know what you think. I want to try out this Liza Minnelli, whatever, Seeger voice. And I was like, okay. Like, it wasn't what I originally envisioned in my head, but he did. And I was like, that's hilarious. We're keeping that.
But those spontaneous moments sometimes in working with other artists, you really do get that. When you do what I do and you're just composing at home and you don't have people to kind of interact with and all that responsibility falls on your shoulders, you don't get those spontaneous moments as often as you do working with, especially the professional level people that you get to work with.
Well, I think it's also the people that you get together too. I mean, that group was just such a fun group of friends, even, just to be able to do that, and everybody's just like hanging out, having a good time. We're just like, we have like sort of an agenda of what we want to shoot, but it's still a little bit loose. You guys can be drunk or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like when we cracked open a bottle of that Johnny White Walker right beforehand, everybody had some of that, and it's just one of those things where, like, the great thing about being in entertainment is, for me, was like the camaraderie and just like the collaboration with other people, because I started out as a classical pianist and a classical competition pianist at that. And I hated practicing. Like, I hated it more than I have ever hated anything in my entire life. And, which is when I teach lessons, I totally understand when kids are like, I don't want to practice. And I'm like, I get it. I totally get it, but you're still going to have to find some way to make it sound like you practiced.
Right.
And it's funny because that's how I became so good at sight reading. Is when I was a kid, I hated practicing so much. I had to find some way to practice less, but make it sound like I had practiced. And on the piano, it's a little bit harder because you have so many notes.
Right.
When I was in band, I played French horn, and my French horn teacher knew that I was doing that, but he was always so mad at me because I could still play the stuff he assigned me, because I was like, this is easy. There's like 3 valves and like 1 clef of notes. And so I was just like, I'd look at it that morning, and then I'd go in and be like, okay, this is it. And he's just be like, ugh. It's like, but you didn't practice that all week. I'm like, well, I don't know. Does it not sound like I did?
Wow. So you could play the notes, but how do you capture the emotion of the piece?
It's that's something that just kind of developed over time. And one of the great things that my old piano teacher taught me was just that you have to breathe. And it didn't really fully make sense to me really until I started working with singers, but it's really all about the breath. Like, you breathe kind of how you feel things. Like, like if you're in a really surreal situation, you breathe in a little slower but deeper. If you're in a high exciting situation, you breathe a little bit faster. Like everything that's organically going on around you, you react to it with your breathing. True. And so for me, especially when I'm acting, that's how I'm often able to follow a lot of singers or instrumentalists. Is I try and just feel their breathing. I watch and I feel their breathing, and a lot of times that's how we stay together.
That's a really important point, because in a lot of situations you're playing to a click track so that everybody's on time together, but there are times when you are not, and you have to follow the live action. Is that really the secret to it, is just to kind of lock on to their pulse and go with them? Yeah,
it's not really a secret, really. It's just...
No, it's a secret.
As musicians, you're meant to listen. If you're playing in an ensemble, I feel like you're meant to listen to everyone and like really lock in with them anyways.
Right.
But that's just my philosophy. But even when you're playing with a click track, just because you're playing with a click track doesn't mean that you can't be breathing and continuing to really swell and like, like make like put all the nuances in the music. It just means that there is a metronome going on that you need to be kind of staying, pretty close to, because there's things that we have on Click that are a little more have a little more, push and pull to it, but also, are flowy and they're with the metronome. But it doesn't mean that we can't have that, recreate that same feeling with that breathing while a metronome is going on.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So it's there as more of a guide at times than it is a solid, okay, here's where everybody needs to be through this part.
Right. Especially when a singer is like choosing to kind of back phrase a little bit or push and pull, it all has to come back and line up eventually with that click. But, it's the people that really know how to feel that the right way that it works for. Because, otherwise, because sometimes when I work with singers, I'm like, all right, now you're just always behind. Like, you can take it, but you have to give it back somewhere. And most of the time, it's usually in an entrance. Like, once you hit an entrance, you kind of have a little bit of freedom after that to kind of push and pull it how you want, but you're going to have to come and line it up again.
Right.
Because there's a difference between just plain being behind or ahead and actually using that timing for a purpose where it feels right, and you can feel it really helps the phrase and motivates the phrase.
That's true. And sometimes, though, you have certain parts of a song that have programmed instruments that are going to play, and they're based on where you are in the song. So, like, maybe it's measure 48, a string section is going to come on that's programmed. So you have to catch up to it by that point. Otherwise, it's going to be a mess.
Right. And if you haven't, then you probably didn't do your job right or count.
Right. Exactly. Well, you had mentioned camaraderie, and I think that's one of the things that I love working on these projects with you, because one of the things that I experience, for one, I always meet cool new people. I mean, you have just amazing friends in your world, but they come together for you. And I don't know if it's just because they love you, or because they believe in the project, or they really enjoy the doing something different. But every single thing we've done together, like, people always come together and they work their ass off for you. It doesn't matter what you ask them to do, they just do it. And I love that.
I mean, I hope that it's because they like me.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't if they didn't, but...
Well, but I mean, I think when you've done as many projects as I have, I think, like, I try to learn from each experience. But one thing that I feel like is a commonality between every project and every tour and every show that I've ever done is the people. And if your people are happy, if your people feel well taken care of, and they feel appreciated, and they feel respected, they'll do anything. Yeah. They'll trust you to go where it is that you want to go, even if you don't know where that is. And I always try and treat people as equals with respect, and usually I try and surround myself with people on projects that I already trust anyways.
Right.
And then when you already when you have a level of trust where people are like, all right, I know you're making this decision because you've put a lot of thought into it. I know we're going to be taken care of because I know you're going to take care of it. Like, they know that they don't have to worry about that. They don't have doubts about what your motivations are, what your agenda is. Because sometimes we're not lucky enough to work for people like that. With corporations running shows these days, a lot of times it's the bottom line. I used to laugh because when I was out on tour and they were starting to make budget cuts, I was laughing. I'd say that their slogan was, "We're not happy till you're not happy, and we did it as cheaply as possible."
and as funny as that is sadly true.
And it is sadly true. I mean, you can work your ass off at a show, and they can just do nothing for you except expect more of it for less or no money. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's weird because you go back to that office space mentality where you're just like, well, maybe I should just work just hard enough not to get hassled.
Yeah, it's almost like just enough to be known as, wow, that guy's always here, but not enough to be seen, to be thought of when they're coming to those kind of cuts.
Yeah, like not a standout, not like, oh, we need this person here, like, or if we let go of this person, who's gonna do this? But you also don't want to do so much that, like, all of a sudden you've burdened your job with all these extra responsibilities that you don't get paid for, and that's always the danger of doing that. It's like, well, I'm certainly happy to, like, do everything I can to make our show look amazing. Like, at what point you have to decide where it's like, okay, but at this point I need to start maybe being credited or compensated.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and I will have the link to the eggnog song in the show notes so that people can watch and enjoy that. It is absolutely hilarious. It is a little on the naughty side, so if you're easily offended, I would say probably don't watch. But that probably means that more people will watch, as we've discovered. Before we wrap this up, I do want to talk to you about a couple other things really quick. Now I had Greg German on the show last month, and
I love Greg.
He's
two best friends.
He was the one that introduced me to you and Alex, and I think that we would have connected at some point. Obviously we worked together on a couple of shows, but Greg is such a great guy, and one of the questions that I asked him that I want to get your opinion on is, how connected do you get to a show? As far as, maybe not necessarily so much the people you work with, but maybe the show has an impact on you. Is it hard to end a show and go, that's the end of it, I'm never going to play this show with these people again? Or do you just go, okay, that gig's done, I've already got my next one lined up, so I got to move into that one?
Well, I mean, I think everyone's always sad when they've been on a show for a long time and they have to move on. But I mean, also, because I come from the touring world, those tours were ending. So every year I was on a different tour, except when I got to Cats, because that never ends. I actually had to leave. I actually left that show. But I mean, every experience that I've had. I mean, I worked like summer stock up in the Berkshires and out in Daytona Beach, and a couple summers out. I was lucky enough to work at the Muni in St. Louis, which is the largest outdoor amphitheater that does shows. I think it seats something like 11,000, and it's like,
wow,
that theater is like, you work there, you're like a rock star in St. Louis, and it's amazing because I've never really experienced that anywhere. I mean, and they do like a show a week, and you work your ass off for about 10 days in rehearsal, and then you do a tech from that's like midnight to 5 a.m. and then you do the show like for the next week. I mean, it's crazy, and they just don't have a budget out there. And I mean, they had like real horses pulling the Wells Fargo wagon. They had, I think, this like crazy old classic car that they just drove up once on the stage during Annie. They did that. I mean, they had real fireworks when they did Meet Me in St. Louis to commemorate the 100th, I think it's like the 100th anniversary of the World's Fair, which is why Forest Park had been built in the first place, was to host the World's Fair. Right. I mean, it was just it was such a crazy place to be because it like no expense was spared. Like you never heard, okay, well, we don't have the budget to do that. We don't have the budget to do this. And it was always like, all right, how can we make it bigger? And it's like, what? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's like you worked as hard as you played. I mean, I got to work with a lot of really great music directors that were on Broadway and over the years, and I've made a lot of friends that I still keep in touch with from there. And I mean, and I kind of just because being in theater is kind of a bit of a transient lifestyle, because you do go from show to show to show, that you kind of, I guess, I don't know if it's maybe we're just numb to the goodbyes, but it's like we finish a show and you're like, yeah, this was a really great run. Where's everybody going next? Or like it's fun when I read Playbill.com like every day and just see the new cast and like who's gotten cast where, or what people are doing, or that pops up on my Facebook. I mean, social media has really kind of taken the sadness out of not seeing people, because like you can kind of see what everyone's doing and you're just like, oh, I'm so happy for this person. Oh, that person did something so silly. Or you find out, like when people are struggling, and that's also nice too, because you may not have known otherwise, but I feel like you're always going to be connected to like all of the people that you worked with because you spent so much time together, and it doesn't matter how long ago it was. I mean, my very, very, very first tour was A Christmas Carol way back in like 2001. We had like a 5-person pit or something, 4 or 5 people in our pit. And it was out of the Omaha Playhouse in Nebraska. And we did an East Coast tour that somehow ended in Arkansas, Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Because that's East Coast, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a really, really lower tier tour. I mean, like my per diem was something like $25 a day in cash. And I was just like, I was like, this is amazing. I'm eating at a gas station in like Peoria, Illinois.
Right.
You know, or we're in this really cool little theater that was triple reinforced for when elephants came through on vaudeville shows. And, you know, and I still keep in touch with some of those people. Actually, one of our stage managers that was on that show was a stage manager here on a couple of the Cirque shows. I found out, and lives in town, and you know, and it's just funny. Our friend Jay Atwood actually, as a kid, did that same production because they had a couple. They had the traveling ones and the resident one at that Omaha Playhouse, and he was in one of the resident ones, which was so interesting. It's just the whole world is connected. And David Valola, even, who sang the Eggnog Song, I found out actually when we were rehearsing maybe like a couple of weeks ago that he was in the very first show I saw on Broadway, which was the revival of Annie Get Your Gun. And I saw it near the end of the run when Crystal Bernard was in it, and he was in that show.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, and I just found out the other day that you were probably playing piano when I saw Phantom of the Opera years before we would eventually meet.
Probably. I was there subbing for pretty much the entire time except for from after 2 months that they started until they finished. So
yeah, I know it was the last Christmas that it was there, because I think I don't remember what month the show stopped, but I know it was the last Christmas it was here in Vegas.
Yeah, so it probably would have been Christmas 2011, because I know they closed at the beginning of September 2012.
Yeah, that's probably right then. Yeah, that time frame sounds about right. But like, I remember when we worked on the Bright Side, the musical together, which was a very, very touching show for me. That was also the first show that I worked here in Vegas, so that has a lot of significance. But the show itself, I mean, it was a very small cast, but it was for me at least, it was a very emotional show. And even as an audio engineer, when I knew certain things were coming, like, I would have a physical reaction to that. My eyes would well up a little bit when I knew certain things were going to happen every single show. And even though that show was only 3 weeks, even to the last show, I was like, we're never going to perform this together again. And this guy's going off to college, and this guy's going off to another thing. Like it really kind of had an impact on me. Does it get easier over time the more things you do to just kind of let that part go? I
mean, maybe. I mean, I feel like you can probably look at it one of two ways. You can look at it as, I'm sad this is ending, or, you know, for me, a lot of it is just, wow, this is a great experience. I learned a lot from just doing this, and I'm thankful for every chance I get to work with Jelana Sampson, quite honestly. Like, that woman just like shits lyrics and music like that you would not believe. And she's just the nicest person to work with. And those are the people that I love being around, that I'm happy to give my time for and learn from. And, you know, and it's so easy. And I also feel like it's so easy to stay connected these days with like social media, with technology, that, you know, we're never really alone unless we let ourselves really be alone. That's true. You know, so like, you know, everyone is just pretty much like a touch of a text or a Facebook message away if we want to be. You know, maybe people might not write back because they forget, but it's there. It's there for you to use. It's there for you to see what they're doing, like their successes or their failures, or even just like their everyday stuff. Like, you know, even those people that we hate that are like, post on Facebook, I went to the gym. I'm like, okay.
Right, yeah.
But you know, but we can know what people are doing, and for me, like, it's kind of also it's the teacher in me that, you know, is a little bit like interesting to see where people are going to go. You know, like, how did this experience affect them by what they do next?
Right. Well, yeah, and Jelana, you're right. She's amazing, and every time I see that she's performing somewhere, I can't help but to smile, because she's just another person like you, someone who is born to do what you're doing, and it's a joy. But with Brightside, what was interesting is I can't remember if you were coming back from Australia and you couldn't make the initial rehearsals.
No, I had gone home for my mother's birthday, because I had already planned a surprise trip home to surprise her for a couple of days before I took Brightside, and knew that I was going to be out for those 3 days of tech. Right.
And then you come back. Now, this was a very, very piano-heavy show, because a lot of the music was written in part with Jelana and Martin Kaye, who was performing as Jerry Lee Lewis. And that is the style of piano that he writes a lot of times. Being that it was so heavy on the piano side, what was the challenge with coming in right before we started performances?
Well, I was with them for throughout the rehearsals. What was hard was having that sub come in and play those 3 days of tech, and it was because Martin Kay does play like Jerry Lee Lewis, but he doesn't read music or write it down. So someone was having to transcribe all of that stuff.
Really?
And it was the same with and it was the same with the vocals. Actually, Jelana, I think maybe like in that March, like for a week, like at the beginning of March that year, she and I sat down and we hashed out vocal charts for the whole thing because it was just going to be faster that way.
Right.
But yeah, we at least had some vocal charts to go off of, and I think Martin St. Pierre was trying to orchestrate it out or like track it. But the thing is when the problem with playing stuff in to something like Logic and exporting the MIDI is that for anybody who's ever had to do arrangements that way, you'll know it looks like total ass.
Yeah, it is. It's just a mess.
Yeah, because things aren't quantized. Like things aren't like none of the rhythms are right. None of the timing's going to be right, and especially if you have like a rubato section or you have like a retard, it doesn't account for that in things like Logic. It's just a huge mess, and especially if it's not quantized correctly, everything you could just have like a page of black notes with like nothing discernible on it. And poor Martin St. Pierre was trying to hash his way through that while I was also trying to hash my way through that so I could play it and trying to make my own charts as we went along, so at least I had something for my sub to have. And in reality, like we didn't really have all of the charts fully done until almost that week of tech.
Wow. I didn't know that about Martin because I saw him perform a couple of times when he was at the Dueling Piano Bar at Harrah's. Because he was doing a $1 Million Quartet at the same time that Brightside was going on, and he was doing the piano bar in the afternoons. And that man is another one. Just he could take songs I can't stand, like American Pie, and he would turn them into something just amazing and brilliant because he would do his own arrangements on the fly. He would pull up the lyrics on his iPad and just play whatever he felt. And it always was enough of the song that you could recognize it, but it was also a lot of him. I mean, just a born live performer. And now he's doing cruise ships a lot, which it makes perfect sense because that's the kind of performer you would expect to see.
Yeah, I mean, he's an amazing piano player. And it's just funny because like when people like, I feel like the hardest part about composing is having to write it all down, really. Because it's so easy to just sit down and play something, but it's the painstakingness of having to write it all down. And I mean, that's really what takes the longest. Like it took me a long time to write out the piano parts, even for Eggnog, because I had to start it out. You start out with like the basic stuff, and then as you go through it, you're like, okay, I'm going to take the melody out. Now I've got to go through and see what I actually want to play, and now I have to actually write that down.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it takes hours, and for me, I'm not super quick. Like I'll write out my charts in my notation program because I use Overture because I'm not cool enough to have figured out Sibelius yet. But
it's a monster. It's an absolute monster.
Yeah, but I mean, it is one of those things. It just takes a long time. I mean, like Robbie's really quick at it, but like for me, like it's still one of those things that I'm just learning on my own, and it's painstaking. But once you get through it, you're like, yeah, I did that. It still would have been faster if I hand wrote it, but now it looks nice and other people can read it. And and it was a little bit hard with Brightside because my sub, I think maybe might have changed his mind about how committed he wanted to be to that project from when I talked to him to when we actually hit that tech period. And I don't think that he really, listened. And it's funny because he was from the world of Cirque du Soleil where they have no charts. They're basically having to listen to stuff and they can make their own charts, but you're listening to it and then you're kind of having to go from there and figuring out your own stuff. And so I thought, oh good, so maybe this would be a good fit. And it just those 3 days I just felt horrible being away, because I was just like, oh, this is not turning out how I had hoped it would turn out.
Right.
And I did get barked at by the stage manager on the day I came back because he thought that I wasn't going to be prepared for that opening show that I was going to play, but lucky for me, I was.
Well, what's interesting is that the stage manager was saying things like that. He's like, I don't know how she's going to do this. I don't know how she's going to do this. And everybody that was involved said, it's Angela. She's got this. Like you have a real strong level of trust with people in this town. And I mean, obviously you've earned it. There's people just didn't make that up. I mean, you've shown what you can do. But that's pretty cool that people seem really confident that you can walk in at the last minute and jump in and do what you need to do because you've shown that skill.
Yeah, I mean, and just and if you think about how long it takes to even build that reputation, because you know that saying, you can create all the wonders of the world, but you fuck one horse.
Right. And the horse might not mind, but everyone else will. So the last question I wanted to ask you is, what is the status of Brunch to Broadway? You were doing a sideshow on Sundays that was actually a really cool idea, and it was with Bob Torty from Brightside, and I believe Alex was playing drums on it. Where is that at this point?
We're still in negotiations for next year. Right now, they're slated to do a New Year's Eve show, but it's just for like the Sunset Station VIPs. They haven't turned it into a ticketed event yet for some reason. We did 2 shows as a test run there at Sunset in July, which they also didn't make a ticketed event. So none of those shows have been open to the public.
Kind of hard to judge what your audience is going to be if you don't let the audience in.
Yeah, I mean, and we had great audiences. I mean, like, they were real interactive, which was, good. I mean, it was just so much fun for us, just those old people are just like, hey, and you're just like, oh my God, she said that, while you're on stage. It's just, we're just all up there laughing, having a great time. And yeah, so they're all getting ready to do New Year's Eve there. Alex and I can't be there because we have to be at Reve and we can't get off of work. But we're hoping that, with a good enough response from those two dates that we have there, that I think they're considering maybe giving us some possible dates in 2019. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed.
That would be really cool. And you guys started at Station Casinos at the Red Rock Casino.
We did, yeah.
Now, when a celebrity is in the audience, do you usually know beforehand, or do you usually find out after the fact? Because Al Pacino made an appearance at one of your shows.
Al Pacino came, and I think Stanley Tucci was there once too up at Red Rock, and really? We only found out after because our audio guys were like, well, we didn't want to make you nervous, so we just didn't tell you. And we're like, but then we could have been looking at them when we were playing.
Yeah. I mean, you've done so many shows and so many tours. You've performed, I can't even imagine the count of how many shows you've performed. Do you still get nervous, or do you just kind of get in your zone and do it?
It just depends. When I used to sub, I would always be a little bit nervous if I hadn't been in a while to play the first show. And because I'm the assistant band leader at Reve, I will call the show, which is kind of like the same as conducting, but we call it over the mic. And I'm supposed to rotate in, but I did it on, I think, Wednesday night this week, and I hadn't done it since before we left for our 5-day break near the end of October. So it'd been a couple months, and we changed a few things in November, and I just hadn't called the show. So the first one back's always a little bit nerve-wracking because you just have to pay more attention, really, is all. Right. But yeah, I mean, like when I played my first show, subbing in at Waitress, like it was a new show and I hadn't played a new one in a while. And that's always a little bit nerve-wracking because you want to do, like, I try to never go into a first rehearsal where I'm not like 95% there. And that's part of why I think everyone just trusts me so much.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly you've proven that. But what about with your own show? Because now you've been doing the Rev for quite a while, so it's an office thing to you. You go in 5 days a week, you do your work, and you go home. But you're still performing in front of, what is that theater, like 2,500 seats?
No, I think that one holds maybe a little under 1,600.
Oh, okay. But still, that's a lot of people. So that's 3,200 people a night if it's sold out.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, like, as every day as we kind of get, each show is always different. There's never 2 shows that are ever going to be alike. And actually, when I was at the Nutcracker rehearsal a few weeks ago at the Smith Center, our conductor, Jack Gaughan, said something that just really resonated with me. And what he said was, he's like, even though this is our job, he said, it's really a privilege to be able to make music like we do every night. And also, and he said, and we should never lose sight of the fact that every show we do is somebody's first show and somebody's last show.
Wow. That's powerful.
And I thought about that. I was like, that is probably one of the most powerful parts about our job, because that's absolutely true. This may be like, I know when I was on tour with The Wizard of Oz, like I'm at that age now where like a lot of my friends have had kids, and they haven't. And The Wizard of Oz, the tour that I was on, was the first show that their kids got to come see, and that was really, it's really exciting, because I think about the first show I saw, which was Phantom of the Opera. I think it was maybe back in 1994 or 95, and oddly enough, Ted Keegan was playing the Phantom on that tour, and I saw him in that tour, and then I ended up working with him later here at Phantom in Las Vegas, because he was in the ensemble and he was a Phantom understudy.
Oh, nice.
And he was there, and when I went out on the tour in 2009, I think one of the keyboard players had been on that tour all the way back then as well, because those guys were on there for years, some of them. So it's if you think about the impact that music has on everyone, whether it's for good or for evil. Music connects everything. Everybody wants a soundtrack to something, so music is always going to be present.
Right. Very, very true. That's very well said.
Yeah, and it really is a privilege to be able for people to know that every show we do is somebody's first and somebody's last show.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that everybody who's really is an artist and really cares about what they do for the reason just that they love doing it, loves to share that with people and loves to be able to give people the opportunity to enjoy it. And the shows here are on such a spectacular, grandiose level. And I think Reve is one of the biggest instances of that, because visually it's a very grandiose show. The music is huge in that theater. The shows here are really an important thing. And I love that people get to come and appreciate them, and I love that there's talented professional people like you that deliver a great performance night after night and show after show, that people can trust that when they pay $115 or $75 or $50, whatever they're going to see is going to be good. Yeah,
I think if you really love doing what you love doing, which I totally do, like I can't imagine really doing anything else, it really shows. Like you can tell when someone plays and they love what they're doing, or if they just don't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's definitely a difference between a dial-in performance.
The difference is astounding. It's like, and people can totally tell. Like they can tell if you are into it and if you love. I didn't love Cats the musical, but I didn't play it like I didn't like Cats.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome, and I'm so glad that you're out there doing it. You're one of the people that if I'm working on something and I find out that you're working on it, even if you're just going to be there for a day, I'll just smile, because you earn a lot of trust. People know that whatever the challenge is, we're going to find a way to overcome it, and you give everything your all, and I have nothing but the greatest of respect for you. I always have, and on top of that, you're just a fantastic and fun person. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking some time out from your ridiculous schedule.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. This is exciting.
Yeah, thank you. And like I said, we'll get the, I say we as if there's anyone else doing this. I will get the link up
Your
to...
6 assistants?
Right, yeah. We'll get the link up to the video and, of course, your website and everything. And if you guys are coming to Vegas, definitely check out Reve at the Wynn Hotel. It's a little bit more expensive of a ticket than some of the other shows, but the costs are higher because it's a water show. So obviously to maintain that, much like the Cirque du Soleil show at the Bellagio, it's a little more costly to maintain the show. So the cost of the ticket is a little higher, but I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Thank you so much, Angela, for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much, Scott.
You bet. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Oh, how cool is she? That was just a blast talking to her. And if you get into town, go see Reve. It's an absolutely phenomenal show. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Haskincast podcast. We will be back on Wednesday with another episode. And I'm loving watching the subscribers grow and the number of downloads grow. So thanks for listening. Send me your New Year's resolutions to scott@scotthaskin.com. I would love to hear them. And please take a moment and give the show a rating or a thumbs up, or whatever you have available depending on which format you're listening to. And everyone have a safe and happy New Year, and we'll be looking forward to talking to you again next week. Bye.